The Turkey that you see now is very different from the Turkey I grew up in. In many ways, I grew up in a Turkey that had turned its face towards the West, wanted to be part of the European Union, and had very little interest in the Middle East. Today's Turkey, after 18 years of Justice and Development Party led by Tayyip Erdogan, is a country that definitely wants to have a voice, an influence, and even military presence outside its actual borders. It is no longer single-mindedly interested in being part of the West. I think it wants flexible alliances with West, the EU, Russia, and EU, Russia, United States, not necessarily finding its NATO partnership to shape its entire foreign policy. And I think thirdly, it's a country that is more self-assertive and engaged with the Middle East. Whereas for my generation of Turks, for my mother's generation, and even for my grandmother's generation, Middle East was a no-go area. There was no interest, no desire to get involved, enmeshed, let alone have any presence. I think that the 3 generations after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the lesson they took was we need to be a European nation state and only a nation state. I think there is a new generation and definitely a different mindset now in Ankara, a greater and greater involvement in the Middle East, a tendency to see Turkey as a country that has to be present in Syria, present in Libya. And I think with the presence of a rising number of Syrian refugees and more engagement in the Syrian conflict, Turkish foreign policy is now as much about the Middle East as it is about Europe. I think this external engagement and desire for external engagements beyond Turkey's nation-state borders comes with opportunities and challenges. Opportunities, obviously, Turkey it has growing trade ties in Africa with the Balkans. It's not just exporting goods, but has investments in these places, and also is developing a sphere of influence in its immediate geography, be it the Middle East or the Balkans. The challenges are the security challenges. With each engagement come risks that are sort of actual human casualty figures, as we've had in the Syrian conflict, to things like refugee inflows, to fault lines. Turkey certainly has new friends in the region and new alliances, but it also has new enemies. There are new fault lines that are formed in the Middle East. Qatar and Turkey on one side, and Saudi Arabia and UAE on the other side seems to be one of the fault lines in Eastern Mediterranean today. So it's a mixed bag. Advantages and opportunities alongside challenges. The Syrian issue is perhaps the most burning foreign policy issue for Turkey. It's now involved in the civil war as a side to it. It's supporting, both in terms of supporting opposition and running several different pockets inside Syria, which are now under Turkish control, and of course now involved in a very hot conflict directly with the Syrian regime. But of course, Syria is going to be the top issue in foreign policy. Engagement is popular in some parts and not so popular in other parts. Foreign policy is always a domestic issue, and I think more and more focus on Turkey-Syria policy is going to make it difficult for the government to deepen its engagement elsewhere in the region. And I think that we're going to be discussing Syria a lot over the next 2-3 years. And certainly it's going to be a top issue in Turkish domestic politics and competition as well. When I read opinions of Turkish foreign policy, there's often the sense that everything is very carefully thought through, premeditated, and part of a grand strategy. And to be honest with you, even with big powers, but certainly for medium-sized powers like Turkey, sometimes things happen on a far more ad hoc basis, not really institutional decisions, and not things that were decided years ago, but as a response, an ad hoc response to developing crisis. For example, Idlib conflict, the final phase of the Syrian conflict, is one in which Turkey is, it doesn't fit Turkey's Syria policy in other parts of Syria, but it's a response that's developed as events on the ground evolve. So foreign policy, yes, it's often based on principles, but not always, number one. And sometimes it's just responding to hot burning issues of the day.